Hi, this is Terry Etam, writer for the BOE Report and Public Energy #1.
Also the author of The End of the Fossil Fuel Insanity. So how's the book sales? How's the book treating you these days?
Book is okay, I think. It's kind of hard to tell because sales are only online. So I get a report back. It sold 600 copies through March, which great. I don't know if that's good or bad, but yeah, it's a start.
Hey, it's better than 500, better than 300. You know, I mean, it's something, you know.
It's something, and it's one of those things like you mentioned. It's hard writing about fossil fuels, and it's hard to get anybody's attention about a book about fossil fuels. It doesn't really compete with Kardashians or anything else. So, so it takes a bit of effort for word of mouth to get around, I think, and then hopefully it engages with the public. It seems to be so far. There's a lot of good reviews, and people have really enjoyed it so far. So I'm just hoping that it'll keep spreading.
So I wanted to ask you, because you and I have had some conversations about just the rise of environmentalism, how it's gotten to like a religious status for a lot of people. It's gotten to a polarizing extreme places to where the narrative, like we said in our previous interview just like a month ago, that the narrative seems to be to get rid of fossil fuels or to end drilling. And now, flash forward a month ahead of time here and to current day, and we've got two presidential candidates, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who I would call front runners of their party, talking about banning drilling. And that's where we're at now, to where you and I a month ago were just pontificating about this narrative switch. Now, a month later, Colorado signs into law some major restrictions on what people are calling about over half of banning of the industry. And now you got two presidential candidates talking about banning drilling. And just 2 days ago, the governor, or whenever, the 16th, when he signed the bill, said war on oil and gas, actually uttered the words war on oil and gas. What's going on, man? I mean, what happened in 30 days that, it ramped up quick is what I'm saying.
It's astonishing that the whole trajectory of the world is changing in this time frame. It's like you're saying, I read FERC allowed the expansion of, or the creation of several LNG export facilities on the Gulf Coast, and part of their criteria, the thing they were concerned about in future, was the impact of climate change of allowing any more of these facilities. And this is natural gas we're talking about now. So, and 6 months ago that was unheard of. So you're right, it's just changing at warp speed. And I think this narrative, it's like a mania to me, or religion, like you said, that's just gripped the world. And it's just a self-feeding thing now. You have people in Europe, groups, Extinction Rebellion, this group I read about, that's just sitting down in the middle of the street and blocking the streets off, and it's just it's accelerated like nothing I've ever seen.
So I haven't really followed the presidential campaign, which I probably won't. Being a non-political program, that's one of the beauties that we can have. We tried to do politics for a little bit. We sent an intern in, and a half hour later, from watching all the 24-hour news shows, he came back a 90-year-old man. So we decided not to. I'm just kidding. It just sucked the life right out of him.
Sounding like a baby. Yeah, it would.
Are Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren even saying what the solution would be, or are they just finger pointing, saying, let's just ban it? Do you know? Because I haven't seen any solutions or heard of any solutions.
Well, I think that's the key turning point for us as an industry is you're onto something there, is that they have no solutions. I think they're just trying to reflect this wave of opinion that's just taking over. You have everyone talking about climate change. It's everywhere. But it's just gone too far, too fast, and there's nothing that can be done about it in the short term. And we saw that up in Canada here. We've had a couple of governments that got put in place that were greenish or green-leaning anyways, and their tone changes once they get in power. We had that in Alberta here. That once you actually have to run the show, then someone hands you the keys and says, okay, you want it to go green, well, make it happen. And then when they actually have to deal with that and realize, oh, well, do I want to wipe out existing industries? Do I want to rewire the country at an unknown cost? when they're faced with those actual challenges, then they kind of slink back away from the claims that they're making, which is, I suspect, what's happening with your candidates here. They're trying to make political hay by talking the talk that is all part of the news narrative right now. And it's everywhere. Like climate change, obviously, the discussion is, every discussion hinges on climate change now. It's become a joke almost about everything you see that has a negative impact is climate change. And, they're just riding that wave. So I could see why they're doing it. When push comes to shove, if they ever get in your power, I don't think that they would stand by it.
Where's the media? You and I work in the media. I'm in the third world of media, so I mean, I'm fine. I got my niche. I'm very happy I found my place in the media. But we're not Fox News, we're not MSNBC, we're not CNN, we're not NBC, CBS, Viacom, whatever you name it. We're not one of the big guys. How are they allowing this narrative to even be there? I mean, I said this in my last interview that, every year you got some crazy presidential candidates, maybe the guy that wears a Merlin hat and he wants to, legislate dragons. To me, that's almost as sane as trying to ban oil and gas. I mean, that is how crazy that statement is, that it should be in there with dragon legislation. How come the media isn't... How are they allowing this? You know what I mean? Is it just is it really the Kardashians keeping up with the Joneses that kind of dictates everything, or what? I'm just astounded.
Well,
I'm just astounded.
I'm astonished too, and it's a bit through for any of your audience is old enough to remember the .com boom or the housing boom, and it just seems to be these manias where they just lose their feet leave the ground and they just start floating in the wind with the tide of opinion. I remember in the housing boom in the U.S. reading these articles from websites which were running counter to the narrative, and they were saying, like, this is insane. Like, you can't be giving mortgages to people with no jobs and no income. And it was happening before everyone's eyes. And a few people and we feel like that now, I think, looking in at this madness, going, you can't be serious about this, but it happened. And then it blew up. Inevitably, these things blow up. And it was the same with the .com boom in the late 90s when kids, 15-year-old kids would start a website and sell it for $2 million. And this was happening all over, and this is the new age. And then it just kind of blew up. And this is going to blow up too, because, like you say, it's just not feasible. You can't replace fossil fuels in any time frame. You can want to, and you can start working towards it, and you can promote energy efficiency measures and whatnot. But the pace that this has just picked up is just, I think it's just, media's kind of lost its mind. They're just going with the flow, which is being pushed by the people behind it. They claim to have like 100,000 scientists that have signed on. They've captured the market on any kind of academic studies, and they're pushing out this material at an outrageous pace. There's this really funny Twitter feed that got sent around last week. Some wise guy on Twitter, or woman, I think it is, she compiled a list of headlines from around the world about all of the places that claim to be warming faster than the global average. And it's almost every region on Earth. Every country claims to be warming anywhere from 2 to 10 times faster than the global average. And it's just this page after page of these headlines, and it just makes you laugh after a while. And then some climate scientists jumped in and said, oh, well, that's, of course, countries warm faster, land warms faster than the ocean, so that explains it. And then this wise guy on Twitter put up a bunch of more headlines that said, well, the Pacific Ocean is warming 15 times faster than previously thought, and the Indian Ocean and all of these oceans. So if you step back and you look at if you add up, if you have the time and you can analyze this media narrative, it's just completely gone bonkers. But people are buying into it because they think it gets votes. So
it's amazing that the media allows it. Like I said, to me, when you take a step back and listen to somebody utter the sentence, we're going to ban drilling, that is as crazy as dragon legislation. It is just...
It is.
It is. I mean, I feel stupid saying it. I actually feel like I'm being judged for saying such a ridiculous comment, because I just, when I heard that, I actually stopped and just stared and went, oh, I don't even know how to respond to that.
No, it is too absurd for words. And part of the problem circles back to what you said earlier about you want to be non-political or apolitical, which is a wise move. But people keep wanting to make this energy thing political, so they haul politics into it, and they've tied fossil fuels to a certain agenda in the political sphere. And even the United Nations has done this. They said that climate change is a fight against global poverty and social welfare around the world. So they're making it political. And that's why you get people that know nothing about energy who are saying we have to shut down drilling. But they're not responsible for it. And you can say anything you want. You can say, let's go solve world hunger next week, and that's a great idea, but how are you going to do it? And that's why no one says that, because it can't happen. But for some reason, these people still believe that they can say that. And that the media just keeps reinforcing it, because you read stories about how wind and solar have taken over and they're dominating. They're not even close. They're like several percentage of the load. And it's just when conditions are right that they are useful, and most of the time they're not useful. So, but the media narrative would lead you to believe otherwise. I just did a Google search for an article I was writing, and if you Google search wind energy, you come up with like 500 million hits, and solar energy is like 600 million. Fossil fuels is 80 million. So those wind and solar are like 5 times the coverage in the media, even though they're like one fraction. It's inverted, the attention that they're getting relative to what they contribute. And it just goes, it's across the world, like you say, the infrastructure that's in place for petroleum especially, but fossil fuels also. Like, how do you go about rewiring that? And we've talked about this before. It can't be done by any logical person. If you ask an engineer how you would do it, you just get a blank stare too. It's like talking about dragons, just like you're mentioning.
That's what I'm saying. It's so obviously insane that it's remarkable that it's allowed. I mean, listen, I've got reprimanded in the media for a lot less. I mean, for statements that were a lot, truer, basically. And to think of that is mind-boggling to me. The other thing that happened in the last 30 days is we put in an order for a belt. We are going to do the Earth's Champion, and we're going to go around with this belt.
Excellent.
Talking about how the oil and gas industry is saving the planet, how they are the leaders when it comes to saving the planet. I mean, from the rig mats to the engineering, all kinds of different things. They're one, and hopefully other people will come up and say, no, we're doing this too. We're doing this too. But the oil and gas industry is really investing a lot of money into making the planet cleaner. And it's almost like the more they invest, the more extreme the other side gets. That's so weird to me.
Yeah, and there's no thanks for it too. There's up here in Canada, as I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with it, but we can't get oil out of Alberta, out of Western Canada, because all of the big new pipeline developments have been blocked. And when we had a government come in 4 years ago, they were a semi-socialist government, but even they understood when they got to power that we need to get pipelines built. And so they said to the rest of the country, they said, okay, we will do what you want. We will put on a carbon tax in this province. We will put a cap on emissions from the oil sands, which are the biggest producing region up here. So we will do what you want. We swear that we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We just need a pipeline or two to get our product to market. So those policies got implemented, the taxes got implemented, the cap got implemented, and no pipelines. Because it's like you say, they just pulled the rug out from everybody under everybody's feet, and it doesn't matter what you say or do. You're still doomed for standing behind fossil fuels. You're called a denier now for standing behind fossil fuels. And part of this is the industry's fault, because we have to turn around and say, the obvious fact that 7 billion people are alive on Earth right now because of fossil fuels, and for no other reason. And if you want to take away fossil fuels, you have to decide which 4/5 of that population has to go. So you pick who you want it to be, because that's the cost of getting rid of fossil fuels. That's what it's going to be, because you simply can't feed and heat these people.
I'm going to ask this question to you, because I'm reluctant asking this because, the Earth's Champion, and I work in the media and you work in the media, so it's a little bit selfish on our parts.
You hold the belt currently, don't you?
I do hold the belt until somebody beats me from it. We're going to debut it at the Bakken Barbecue. Oh man, the last interview I had, he goes, I want a picture with that belt. And I said, oh, it's already working. It's already working. We're going to go to high schools, everything. And,
good.
Oh, anyway, I understand you and I make our revenue from oil and gas companies supporting through advertising and marketing and public relations and everything like that. So all you oil companies, I'm well aware of where I'm about to take the conversation. I do believe, and we've mentioned this before, so I want your current take on this. I believe that the narrative has gotten so extreme for the environmentalists that is a rare opportunity for the oil and gas industry to step up to the plate and do some real public relations, like get creative, to invest some money, to figure out ways to educate on a new level that they've never tried before, because the other side's already crazy. You already got two presidential candidates coming out and saying, well, you got two presidential candidates saying we want to ban drilling. You can't get much higher with the craziness than the president. So
nope, you cannot.
And I realize the current one as well. So and how that's funny for some people listening, and how I just ticked off other people for pointing that out too. I'm a Trump, and I'm a Trump fan.
It's funny.
And I'm a Trump fan, so the things he's done for the industry have been very good. So what I'm getting at though is, what is your opinion on that? You know, now that we've completely overly disclosed the fact this is how we make our living, do you think the oil and gas industry should reevaluate their public relations and their marketing and just their money they spent, their creativeness behind it? Just talk to me about public relations, the current state of the environmental talk, and how this is a rare time for the industry to actually do something.
Yes, it is a rare time for them to do it, and it's a crossroads too for the industry. And the way that I sliced it in my book, or looked at it, is that for a long time the whole industry was used to dealing with governments. They weren't used to dealing with the public, because governments wanted fossil fuel development, which is another narrative that gets lost here too. It's governments that have been encouraging fossil fuel development around the world. They've invited companies in, develop these concessions, develop these offshore concessions, bring wealth to our countries, bring jobs. We need cheap fuel. So that's been going on for a long time. So the industry, especially at the higher levels, has been used to just dealing with governments. And that's one reason that Trump, when elected, he put in Rex Tillerson, the former head of ExxonMobil, as his Secretary of State, because it made total sense. Because Rex Tillerson actually had more experience dealing with global heads of state than Trump did.
Absolutely.
Ironically enough. But that's how the oil patch worked. And so for forever, the energy industry has relied on governments as supportive and partners, and if you wanted something done, you talk to the governments. And so there's just been a lot of inertia, and big institutions have built up operating this way. And now that rug's been pulled out from underneath their feet too, and so governments don't want to talk to oil companies because they're talking crazy talk like banning drilling. So this is something totally new. Now you have to turn the aircraft carrier around of all of these, the big petroleum industry. It has to change direction now. It has to say, okay, we can't do that anymore, even though we have all of our existing communications departments are built for that aspect. Now we have to rethink how we do things. We have to get our message out there. We have to explain to people, and it's not even a defense of fossil fuels, it's just the reality of fossil fuels, whether you like them or not. And I'm sure there's a lot of people I know in the industry that say, yeah, we're not going to be on fossil fuels forever. That there's an end in sight to that. 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we don't know. But the cheap stuff is getting used up, and it's just going to get more and more expensive. If you look where the development is in the world, it's in the U.S. shale basins, and then it's pretty much offshore everywhere else. It's in pretty remote locations. And so it's getting harder and harder to find. So at some point, we are going to start converting, and energy people should be at the forefront of that change, because if you want to change the world's energy systems, who should be at the table? The first people that should be at the table are the ones that are running it now, because they're the ones that are going to have to be charged with transitioning it. So to try and sideline them is just as insane as dragon talk, like you're saying. Why would you want to put those people on the side and say, we don't want anything to do with you anymore, when you're the ones that run the existing infrastructure? So it's it's an opportunity, and it's critical that the oil patch be involved, or the energy sector, because they know how it works and they know how to change it, rather than just wishing things away like this fairy tale talk that we hear from politicians. So I think you're right. It's a great opportunity, but we have to start with communications, and we have to get people to understand how they rely on things. They just get more and more removed from it, especially when you live in a big city. You don't think about where your heat comes from or where your fuel comes from or where your food comes from. It's just there, right? You go to the store and there it is, or the gas station. And nobody thinks about where it comes from. So we have to get people thinking about that. Where does it actually come from? And that it's not just pixie dust that's going to change our energy system.
Well, that's like the Earth's champion. He wants to go out and let people know that if you want an electric car, well, you better start supporting coal. And if you want,
that's where power comes from.
If you want an iPhone, well, you better support oil and gas. I mean, if you want food, well, you better support oil and gas. I mean, these are just some really basic things to where it's sad that we live in an age where people need to be reminded about those things. And,
it is, but it's just part of the media narrative too, where and I think it's a bit human nature where you take for granted when something just shows up all the time. You don't really think about it very much. And you don't really appreciate it very much until you have to do without it. And people aren't used to doing without anything. Like if you look at a power outage now, people are outraged, even though they might have to get used to a lot more of them. Because there's this second order things like explaining to people how a rapidly advancing solar industry destabilizes the electrical grid because it's not made for that. And the people that have to provide baseload power are the companies that don't want to invest in infrastructure because there's no money in it anymore because the solar companies get all of the revenue. So it's we have to get these concepts across too, saying like, no, these things aren't. There's no silver bullet here that's going to solve everything. We got to. It's a long process, and everybody has to work together.
Terry Etam with us, the BOE report. What's the name of your daily website?
Public Energy #1.
Public Energy #1. What's going on in your world in terms of your latest writings? You write. How often do you write?
Well, I'm busier than I should be, I suppose. I have a day job too, and then I write for these websites. I try and get out a post once a week or something on either site, so it keeps me busy.
I figured it was at least once a week, so I wanted to say weekly, but I didn't know. I mean, you're like like a lot of writers nowadays. You sometimes you write 4 articles a week, and then you might go a week and a half without writing one, and then all of a sudden you're back on it again, and then a magazine will get in touch with you, and then all of a sudden you got a book.
Yeah, that's right. When you said that your person got exposed to politics and they came out a 90-year-old man, that's what I feel like some days when I'm exposed to what goes on out there in the world of media messaging for energy. So, but it is. One thing that's interesting is that the tide is changing. You mentioned what I'm writing about is that you're starting to see cracks in all of this facade that you're talking about, where people are. There's an article, or the mayor of London has had it up to here with environmental protesters, and he put out a letter. So because these people are just blocking up the streets now, they just go sit in the street and they're saying we demand action on climate change, and they're clogging up the city. So people are starting to get fed up with this stuff, and they're saying, "Oh, enough! We have a world to run here. You can't just clog up everything." And I think that's going to start happening more and more with these people that are blocking everything, and then when it starts having a real impact on people's lives, and that's the part that these people don't understand. I don't think these advocates that are trying to get to stop drilling and whatnot. This is going to have an impact on the life of the average citizen, and they won't put up with that because they're trying to live. They're trying to feed their kids. They're trying to keep their job. They're trying to save for a vacation. They're trying to save for kids' college funds. This is reality for people, and to drive an electric car to try and save the planet is not going to register with people because that's not going to happen. They have 100 other things to worry about, and that's got to be down the list. That's just how life works in our modern world. So if you want people to change your behavior, you have to come up with a different way rather than just saying we're going to stop drilling. Because that oil is going to come from somewhere else anyways, which is something else I've been writing about too. So Shell pulled their money out of Western Canada in the oil sands, and then they reinvested it all in Nigeria. So from an environmental perspective, is that what you want? Do you want oil to come from Nigeria, where they have no standard whatsoever, and they just flare or vent gas to atmosphere? From an environmental perspective, is that a good thing, or do you want it to come from North America, where we watch what happens? You can't get away with stuff as easily here.
Yeah.
So
get that. Kind of final thoughts here. Terry Etam with us, BOE report. Anything we missed? Anything you want to reiterate? Any final thoughts you might have?
Just say hang in there, everyone, in the oil patch, and keep doing the good work, and keep keeping people alive, and don't be afraid to spread that message. To be a lot more aggressive about it, and stand up for yourself because you're under attack everywhere. I've seen that at dinner parties or in airports or wherever you're at. People are going to come at you for being in the energy business, and just be calm and just try and explain to them where their heat comes from, or their jet fuel on the plane that they're going to climb on. And that if they really want to do something about climate change, then don't get on that plane, because that's your fault just as much as every other person in the world. So just hang in there.